The first time calibration drill 7 failed to resolve. I was standing in the relay bay of the escort frigate Halsey's Reach, watching a duty officer argue with a number that wouldn't change. We'd been running drills like it for 6 years. Synthetic threat tracks fed into the compact's shared sensor net, designed to keep every deterrent crew sharp and every treaty partner honest. Routine. Boring, even. I was aboard to write 400 words about boredom for a readership that liked being told the void was quiet. The officer's screen read contact, unresolved drill tag, active, and he kept hitting the same key like the key was the problem. It wasn't. 11 seconds later, the drill tag dropped on its own. The track was real. The Envoy ship Calderwake was 40 minutes into a treaty renewal transit, truce beacon broadcasting on every band the Thren Assembly had ever asked us to use, when 3 Thren interdiction cruisers came out of a sensor blind and opened on her without a hail. I heard it happen. Comms patched the last 40 seconds of Ambassador Selene Okonkwo's traffic straight into the relay bay because nobody had thought yet to stop it. She was reading the corridor clearance numbers to her pilot. She did not finish the sentence. For 6 minutes, ground control still had her logged under the drill designation. 6 minutes of a real woman dying inside a folder built for fiction, because the system had spent 6 years training everyone, including itself, to expect the lie. I wrote that detail down before I understood what it would cost the officer who'd let it happen. He didn't ask me not to print it. He asked me to wait until his daughter was old enough not to read it in a feed. Nobody on the Reach raised their voice. That was the part I hadn't expected and the part I never stopped thinking about afterward. No one screamed. No one struck a console. The duty officer logged the corrected designation real contact, Envoy lost, no SURVIVORS, closed the drill file permanently and opened a new one with a single line. Recommend Fleet Command notified within the hour. His hands did not shake. Grief on a compact deterrent ship looks like paperwork done faster than paperwork has ever been done. By the second hour, every shipyard from Ceres to the Marne Relay had a single order on its boards: full mobilization, designation Verity. I asked an ensign why that name. She said command wanted something that couldn't be mistaken for a drill ever again. A name that meant exactly what it said and nothing else. Movement built in pieces too small to be dramatic and too steady to stop. A corridor of civilian shipping cleared in 90 minutes flat, no exceptions logged, no appeals heard. A reserve carrier group that hadn't fired a weapon in 11 years brought fully crewed inside a day. Yard foremen working triage on hulls that weren't finished, prioritizing weapons bays over paint, because nobody on this fleet was going to need to look pretty. I rode a transport between 3 different staging points in the first week, writing dispatches that command read and didn't censor, because there was nothing in them anyone needed to hide. The truth, this time, was the whole strategy. By the 10th day, command stopped briefing me in summary and started letting me sit in on the staging reviews, because Rays had decided a witness who wrote things down was worth more to this fleet than one more analyst. I watched the manifest fill in real time. The carrier yard at Ceres reporting 4 hulls combat rated 11 days ahead of schedule because the welders had stopped taking shifts off. A reserve cruiser group out of the Marne Relay folding into the formation a full day early. Their captain's only message to Fleet Command reading present. No further comment required. A logistics officer quietly rerouting 6 months of medical stockpile toward the staging line without being asked, because she'd done the arithmetic on her own and didn't see the point in waiting for an order that was obviously coming. Nobody called any of it heroism. They called it Tuesday's numbers and moved on to Wednesdays. I asked Admiral Tomas Reyes once on the second week whether the Assembly understood what they'd done. He said the Thren had spent 4 centuries watching every species in this arm of the galaxy from behind walls of caution, so old they'd calcified into doctrine. A people who treated every unfamiliar signal as a probe, and every probe as the opening move of an extermination campaign, nobody could prove had ever once been aimed at them. He said our drill cycle had finally read, to ears that paranoid, as exactly the reconnaissance they'd always feared. He said understanding wasn't the same as forgiveness, and the fleet wasn't sailing to make them understand. It was sailing to make sure they never mistook us for a maybe again. 618 warships left the Saul staging line on the 19th day. I rode the flagship Calder's Answer. They'd named her for the dead ambassador's ship, not the dead ambassador, because command wanted the dead ship's silence carried into Thren's space, not a face. 3 weeks in transit. I watched gun crews run drills that were, for the first time in 6 years, allowed to be called by their honest name. Rehearsal, not deterrence theater. Nobody pretended this one was synthetic. We translated into the Thren home system on the 22nd day, in formation, lights running cold and full, every hull broadcasting its registry openly, because Rays wanted no ambiguity about who had come or why. The Assembly's home fleet, 81 cruisers, the bulk of what they'd built in a century of patient, frightened expansion, held position at their inner defense line, and said nothing for 11 hours. Rays gave the one warning himself, broadcast once, on every band the Assembly had ever used with us, the same bands the Calder Wake had died broadcasting on. You executed an unarmed envoy under truce markers. You will surrender the interdiction wing responsible, intact, within 1 hour, or we will remove your capacity to make that mistake again. This is not a drill. There will not be a second message. The hour passed. The Assembly's response, when it came, was a tactical realignment, their home fleet moving to screen the interdiction wing rather than hand it over, 81 hulls closing ranks around the guilty 3. Rays read the formation on the plot for 4 seconds. Then he gave one more order, and it was the only order he gave that day. What followed lasted under 30 minutes, and I have spent longer than that since, trying to describe it without making it sound like something it wasn't. It wasn't a slaughter. The Verity fleet didn't burn the Assembly's home world, didn't touch a civilian hull, didn't chase anything that broke and ran. It dismantled with total precision. Every vessel that had moved to shield the 3 responsible, 81 ships reduced to debris and survivors in life pods that our own picket craft recovered, methodically, alongside the wreckage, because Rays had said removal of capacity, and he meant exactly that and nothing more. The 3 interdiction cruisers themselves were boarded, not destroyed, their crews taken for the tribunal the Compact's own charter required. The boarding parties logged every name before they logged a single charge, because Rays had made it standing order that no prisoner crossed onto a Compact deck as a number before they crossed as a person. A distinction he never once let me forget he was drawing on purpose, in plain sight of every camera the press corps had brought. 618 ships, and the order that ended the engagement was, cease fire, begin recovery, log everyone. I stood on the observation deck afterward with a Thren liaison officer pulled from one of the life pods, wrapped in a thermal blanket meant for a human frame, watching debris drift past the viewport in the cold light of a sun that wasn't ours. She asked me, through a translator that hadn't been calibrated for grief, why we hadn't simply ended them since we so clearly could have. I told her the truth, because by then it was the only thing this fleet had any use for. I said we'd had 6 years of practicing what a real threat would look like, and somewhere in those years we'd forgotten how to recognize a real apology, and that losing one envoy to a misread signal was a cost we intended to never pay twice. But that didn't mean we'd let it turn us into the thing that misread us first. I filed that dispatch under my own name, with no drill tag attached to it, and no one above me ever asked me to change a word. The wreckage took 4 days to clear. Calder's Answer stayed in orbit the whole time, lights running, broadcasting the same registry, open on the same bands, until every hull that had fired on the Calder Wake was accounted for and the last life pod was logged. Then Rays gave the order to come home, and the only thing left on that frequency, after 22 years of fiction, we taught an entire species to read as fact, was the sound of a channel finally telling the truth, and nobody left to mistake it for anything else.